November 3, 2024. Clara Mae Jackson walked into the Dixie Belle Diner 5 minutes late, soaked from the rain, and got fired on the spot in front of 20 regulars who wouldn't meet her eyes. Her hands were still shaking from pulling a stranger out of the storm the night before. Her uniform clung to her skin. Water dripped from her hair onto the black and white checkered floor she'd mopped 1,000 times. What nobody in that room knew was the elderly man sitting quietly in booth 7, the one she had saved from hypothermia 12 hours earlier, was Thomas Whitaker. The founder who vanished 28 years ago. The man who built the diner chain from nothing and walked away from everything. And Clara Mae Jackson, the waitress being humiliated in front of the breakfast crowd, was the baby daughter he never stopped searching for. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Most folks in Columbia, Tennessee, only knew Clara Mae as the waitress who always refilled your coffee before you asked. She kept butterscotch candies in her apron pocket for the long-haul truckers and knew everyone's order by heart. She was 48 years old, worked double shifts when she could get them, and raised her grandson Malik after her own daughter Ashley lost the fight with pills 6 years back. Clara lived in a little white house on the south side with creaky floors, a porch swing that needed painting, and a vegetable garden out back where she grew tomatoes every summer. She still drove the same dented silver Camry she'd bought in 2009. The check engine light had been on for 3 years. She couldn't afford to fix it, so she just learned to ignore it. People liked Clara because she listened without judging and never made you feel small, even when you couldn't leave much of a tip. Nobody in Columbia connected the woman who worked double shifts at the Dixie Belle with the faded missing child poster that used to hang in the post office back in the 90s. Nobody remembered that Thomas Whitaker, the man who'd opened the first Dixie Belle on Main Street in 1987, had a daughter. Nobody talked about what happened to him after his wife died. It was old grief, and folks around here knew better than to dig up old grief. But Clara kept something in her apron pocket every single day, right next to the butterscotch candies. A tiny silver baby bracelet, tarnished and delicate, with a clasp that didn't work anymore. She didn't know where it came from. It had been in a shoebox of things her Aunt Linda left her when she passed. Clara just knew it felt important, like holding onto a memory she couldn't quite reach. And on that November night, when the storm hit and she saw those weak hazard lights blinking through the rain on Highway 43, something told her to stop. Something she couldn't explain made her pull over. Go back to March 19, 1996, 28 years earlier. Thomas Whitaker was 34 years old, owned 3 Dixie Belle diners across Middle Tennessee, and had everything a man could want. A beautiful wife named Ruth, a house on 10 acres with a pond, a baby on the way. They'd already picked out the name. Clara Mae. After Ruth's grandmother, the nursery was painted yellow, the crib was assembled. Thomas had installed a porch swing himself, because Ruth said she wanted to rock their baby and watch the fireflies on summer evenings. Everything was ready. Everything was perfect. Until it wasn't. Ruth went into labor 3 weeks early on a Tuesday morning. Thomas drove her to Maury Regional, held her hand through the contractions, and told her she was doing great. But something went wrong. The doctors tried everything. Ruth hemorrhaged. They couldn't stop it. She held Clara Mae once, for maybe 30 seconds, before the monitors started screaming. By the time the sun came up, Ruth was gone. Thomas held his daughter in the hospital room while his wife's body lay covered in white sheets. He counted her fingers, counted her toes, looked at her face, and saw Ruth in every feature. It broke something inside him that never healed. The baby cried, and Thomas didn't know how to make her stop. Didn't know how to feed her or change her or do any of the things Ruth was supposed to teach him. He felt like he was drowning. Ruth's sister Linda came to the hospital that afternoon. She was 29, single, a nurse who'd always wanted children but never had any of her own. She took Clara Mae from Thomas's arms, and the baby stopped crying almost immediately. Thomas watched Linda rock his daughter, and felt relief and shame in equal measure. He couldn't do this, couldn't be a father without Ruth, couldn't look at his daughter without seeing his dead wife. 3 weeks later, the day after Ruth's funeral under the dogwoods in the family cemetery, Thomas signed custody papers, giving Linda full guardianship. He set up a trust fund in Clara May's name. He signed the diner chain over to a board of directors, and then he disappeared. Linda took baby Clara to Valdosta, Georgia, where she had a job lined up at a hospital. She legally changed the baby's last name to Jackson, her own maiden name, because she thought it would be easier. She raised Clara as her own daughter and never told her the truth. Not because she wanted to deceive her, but because Linda honestly believed Thomas was never coming back. She believed he'd made his choice, and maybe he had. But what Linda didn't know was that Thomas never stopped looking. He didn't go far. He drove back roads through Tennessee and Georgia for 28 years, stopping in small towns, sitting in diners, scanning every little girl's face for Ruth's green eyes. He worked odd jobs, fixed cars, painted houses, lived in motels and rented rooms. He kept a photograph of Ruth holding newborn Clara in his wallet, the edges worn soft from being touched too many times. He didn't know what he'd say if he ever found her. Didn't know if she'd forgive him or spit in his face. He just knew he had to keep looking. Clara grew up not knowing any of this. Linda was a good mother. Strict but loving. She made sure Clara did her homework, went to church on Sundays, and learned how to cook the way their grandmother had. When Clara asked about her father, Linda said he died before she was born. It was easier than the truth. Clara believed her. Why wouldn't she? She had a good childhood, not fancy, but stable. Linda worked long shifts at the hospital, and Clara learned early how to take care of herself. How to make her own lunches. How to get herself to school. How to be responsible. When Clara got pregnant at 19 with Ashley, Linda didn't yell or judge. She just helped. They raised Ashley together in that little house in Valdosta, 3 generations of women making it work. Clara got her GED, worked at a pharmacy, and tried to give her daughter a better life than she'd had. But Ashley struggled. She got into the wrong crowds, started using, and by the time she was 24, she had a son named Malik and a drug problem she couldn't shake. Linda died in 2010 from a stroke. She went fast, which was a mercy, but it left Clara reeling. She was 32 years old with a 6-year-old grandson, a daughter in rehab, and bills she couldn't pay. She sold Linda's house, packed everything into a U-Haul, and drove north to Tennessee because something about it felt familiar. She couldn't explain it. She'd never been to Tennessee in her life, as far as she knew, but when she crossed the state line and saw the green hills and the way the light hit the trees, something in her chest loosened. She ended up in Columbia because the rent was cheap and the Dixie Belle Diner was hiring. She got the job on the spot. The owner, a man named Ray Carter who'd bought the chain from some board of directors years earlier, liked that she had experience and didn't ask for much money. Clara moved into the little white house with the creaky floors and started over. Ashley came to live with them after rehab. For 2 years, things were okay. Then Ashley relapsed and died in 2016. Malik was 12. Clara became his whole world. She raised that boy the way Linda had raised her, with love and structure and the quiet knowledge that life doesn't owe you anything, so you work hard and you show up. Malik was a good kid, played basketball, made decent grades, helped Clara in the garden on weekends. They didn't have much, but they had each other. Clara worked doubles whenever she could to keep the lights on and put food on the table. She never complained, never asked for help, just kept moving forward because that's what you do when someone depends on you. The other waitresses at the Dixie Belle loved her, the regulars loved her. Even Ray Carter, who was tough and cheap and didn't give out compliments, admitted she was the best server he'd ever had. But he was also the kind of man who believed being 5 minutes late was a moral failing, no matter the reason. That November night started with Malik's basketball game. Clara had promised she'd be there, and she was, sitting in the bleachers in her work uniform because she'd come straight from the lunch shift. Malik scored 12 points. Clara cheered so loud the other parents smiled. After the game, she took him to get burgers, then dropped him at home so he could finish his homework. She had to be back at the diner by 6 for the evening shift. She was cutting it close, but she'd make it. Then the rain started, not the soft kind, but the kind that turns the world sideways and makes you grip the steering wheel with both hands. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Clara slowed to a crawl, wipers beating fast, praying the check engine light didn't mean something was about to give out. That's when she saw the hazard lights blinking weak through the downpour on Highway 43. An old Buick pulled halfway onto the shoulder, barely visible in the storm. Clara didn't hesitate. She pulled over, threw the car into park, and ran through the rain to the driver's side window. An elderly man sat behind the wheel, shivering, hands still gripping the steering wheel like he was too cold to let go. Clara knocked on the window. He looked at her with confusion, like he wasn't sure she was real. She opened the door and had to shout over the storm. "You'll catch your death out here. Come on, get in my car." He didn't argue, just nodded and let her help him out. He was soaked through, his jacket heavy with rain, his breathing shallow. Clara got him into her passenger seat, cranked the heat as high as it would go, and handed him the old blanket she kept in the back for emergencies. "You're okay now," she said. "I've got you." She drove him straight to the Dixie Belle, because it was closer than the hospital, and she knew he needed to warm up fast. She unlocked the back door with her key, sat him down at a table, and made him coffee, strong and hot. She found a dry shirt in the lost and found box, and told him to change in the bathroom. When he came back out, his color was better but his eyes were wet. He sat down in booth 7 and just stared at her. Clara asked if he needed her to call someone. He shook his head. "No one to call," he said quietly, his voice cracked on the words. Clara poured him more coffee, brought him a piece of pie, and told him he could stay as long as he needed. She had to lock up and get home to Malik, but she gave him the key to the back room, where there was a cot, and told him he could sleep there if he didn't have anywhere else to go. Thomas took the key. He watched her leave through the rain, and something about the way she moved reminded him so much of Ruth that he had to sit down and cry. The next morning, Clara woke up late. Her alarm hadn't gone off. She'd been up half the night thinking about the man in the storm, wondering if he was okay, feeling guilty that she hadn't done more. She threw on her uniform, didn't bother with makeup, and drove through the drizzle to the diner. She was 5 minutes late. Ray Carter was already there, arms crossed, standing behind the counter with the kind of look that said he'd been waiting. The breakfast crowd was in full swing. 20 regulars sitting in their usual spots. Clara walked in, hair still damp, and started to apologize. Ray didn't let her finish. 5 minutes late and you think this is charity, Clara? You think I don't notice? You think you're special? His voice was loud enough that everyone stopped eating. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Coffee cups hovered in the air. Clara felt her face go hot. She'd worked at the Dixie Belle for 14 years and had never been more than 10 minutes late. She'd covered shifts when other people called in sick. She'd worked Christmas Eve and New Year's Day. She'd stayed late to clean when the dishwasher quit. And now she was being humiliated in front of people she'd served coffee to for over a decade. She didn't argue, didn't cry, just took off her apron slow, folded it careful, and laid it on the counter. Then she walked out into the drizzle without a word. Thomas Whitaker sat in booth 7 with a coffee cup trembling in his hand. He'd been sitting there since 6 in the morning, waiting to thank her, waiting to see if she'd come back. Now he watched her leave, and felt something snap inside him. He stood up, left a $20 bill on the table, and followed her out. He called her name. Clara stopped in the parking lot, rain soaking through her shirt again, and turned around. Thomas stood there, looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. "You saved my life last night," he said. Clara shook her head. "You just needed help. Anyone would have done the same." Thomas said, "No, not anyone. You did." Then he asked her name. She told him, Clara May Jackson. Thomas's face went white. He asked where she was born. She said Valdosta, Georgia, but her aunt raised her there after her parents died. Thomas asked when she was born. March 19th, 1996. He had to sit down on the curb. Thomas didn't tell her everything that day. He couldn't. He needed to be sure. He went straight to a private lab in Nashville and paid for a DNA test. He still had a sample of his own from years ago when he'd tried to get on a donor registry, hoping maybe Clara would look for him someday. He asked Clara if she'd be willing to do a cheek swab, Told her it was for medical reasons. Told her he'd pay her for her time. Clara thought it was strange, but the man had kind eyes and she needed the money, so she agreed. The results came back on a grey Tuesday morning, 10 days later. 99.999% match. Father and daughter. Thomas sat in his motel room and read the report 3 times. Then he put his head in his hands and sobbed like a child. 28 years. 28 years of searching, and she'd been the one to save him. She'd pulled over in a storm for a stranger who turned out to be her father. If that wasn't grace, he didn't know what was. He walked back into the Dixie Belle that afternoon carrying nothing but a small wooden box. Clara was sitting at a back table filling out job applications. She'd been out of work for 10 days and the rent was due. She looked up when Thomas walked in, surprised to see him again. He sat down across from her without asking and set the box on the table between them. "I need to show you something," he said. His voice was shaking. Clara nodded, uncertain. Thomas opened the box. Inside was a tiny silver baby bracelet, delicate and tarnished, with a broken clasp. He laid it on the table in front of her, and said, "You dropped this 28 years ago." Clara stared at it. It looked exactly like the one in her apron pocket. She pulled hers out. They were identical. Thomas said, "Your mama, Ruth, put that on your ankle the day you were born. She died an hour later. I couldn't take care of you. I gave you to your Aunt Linda because I thought she could give you a better life. I've been looking for you ever since." Clara's hands started shaking. The bracelet blurred through her tears. She picked it up, turned it over, and saw the name engraved on the inside in tiny script. Clara May Whitaker. Not Jackson, Whitaker. She looked at Thomas, at this stranger who wasn't a stranger, at the man whose life she'd saved without knowing he'd given her hers. "You're my father," she whispered. Thomas nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry. Baby girl. I'm so sorry I left you. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough. I'm sorry for all of it." Clara stood up so fast her chair tipped over. For a second, Thomas thought she was going to run. Instead, she walked around the table and pulled him into a hug so tight he could barely breathe. They stood there in the back of the Dixie Belle, holding onto each other, crying in a way that made the cook come out from the kitchen to make sure everything was okay. It was. For the first time in 28 years, everything was okay. Thomas didn't make a big show of things. That wasn't his way. He went to Ray Carter, the man who'd bought the Dixie Belle chain from the board years earlier, and made him an offer he couldn't refuse. Thomas bought the whole chain back, every location. Then he signed it over to Clara and put it in a trust that included Malik. He set up a college fund for the boy that would cover 4 years at any school he wanted. He paid off Clara's house, fixed her car, gave her back everything he should have given her from the beginning, but more than that, he gave her time. He moved into the little white house with the creaky floors and the porch swing that still needed painting. He had dinner with Clara and Malik every night. He went to Malik's basketball games and cheered louder than anyone. He helped Clara in the garden, taught Malik how to fix a car, and slowly, carefully, became the father he should have been all along. On Sundays they sit on that porch swing, still unpainted because they keep saying they'll get to it next weekend, and drink coffee while Malik does his homework at the kitchen table. The bracelet now hangs on a chain around Clara's neck, right next to a locket with Ruth's picture inside. Thomas tells stories about Ruth, about the life Clara would have had if things had been different, and Clara listens without bitterness. She tells him about Linda, about how good she was, about how she loved Clara like her own. They've both lost so much, but sitting there on that porch swing, drinking coffee in the afternoon sun, they've found something too. Not a replacement for what was lost, but something new. Something that feels like forgiveness and grace, and the kind of love that waits 28 years to come home. Thomas still goes to the diner sometimes, sits in booth 7, and watches Clara work. She's the owner now, but she still waits tables because she likes it. Likes the regulars and the rhythm and the way people trust her with their coffee and their small talk. Ray Carter doesn't work there anymore. Clara let him go the first week, not out of spite, but because a man who humiliates his employees doesn't belong in a place built on kindness. Malik is 17 now, looking at colleges, talking about studying business so he can help run the diners someday. Clara watches her grandson and her father laugh over pancakes on Saturday mornings and thinks about how close she came to never knowing. How one rainy night and one act of kindness changed everything. How sometimes the people you save end up saving you right back. If you've ever raised a child that wasn't yours, and then found out you were never alone after all, drop a heart below and tell us where you're watching from tonight. If one act of kindness on a rainy road can bring a family home after 28 years, hit subscribe and the bell. We'll see you in the next one.